Hello, everyone and all. Welcome to this introduction to Pulumi. So I'll just get right into the slides I've prepared for you today. Yeah, we're recording. So I've divided this little talk into three parts, and we'll begin right away with concepts that are important to know if you get into Pulumi. First thing is, what is Pulumi to begin with? So Pulumi is an open source infrastructure as code tool that supports many programming languages. I've listed the ones that are supported here: TypeScript, Python, JavaScript, Go, and .NET. And if you know Terraform, Pulumi is similar to Terraform, but the fact that it supports these programming languages gave it the edge that with Pulumi going forwards instead of Terraform, which only supports its own HashiCorp config language, which is a little bit more, um, well, you cannot program with that language, so it's less flexible. So we use Pulumi with TypeScript in the DevOps team at Nesto. And this is what Pulumi looks like. You have the web console on the left, and you have the CLI, which you will probably most interact with on the right. What's important to know is that even if you only interact with the CLI of Pulumi, everything you do, for example, when you do a preview or when you apply changes, will be safeguarded in the Pulumi web console. So you can always retrieve what you've done in the web console. So that's really cool. The first term I want to discuss is what's a stack. A stack is an important concept in Pulumi, and it's simply where a Pulumi program is deployed. So if you look at the screenshot here, I have two different Pulumi projects. I have one named ENV and the other one Global. So ENV has one stack per environment we have at Nesto. So one for demo, one for dev, one for production. But we didn't use this infrastructure for global. We only have a main stack for global because these are shared infrastructures. So we wouldn't have, for example, we wouldn't want to reapply the changes over each stack if they're shared. It's easier for certain cases to keep it all into one stack. So, so these are what stacks are, important to keep in mind. If you go, for example, into the infra repo, as I've done on the top left screenshot, into pulumi/env, you can do a ls, and you will see right away the files that are one file for each stack. So, for example, pulumi.demo.yaml, obviously this is the config file for the demo stack. If you run the pulumi stack ls command, then it's going to give you all the stacks that are currently known to Pulumi and that are version, not necessarily version control, but looked at by Pulumi. And when you run your commands, it's important to know in which stack you are. So I recommend that when you run Pulumi commands in the CLI, you always do a Pulumi stack select before doing anything that might change the stack to make sure you're in the correct one. So it's going to show you a drop-down menu like that, and you simply select your stack. When you want to create a new stack in Pulumi, it's important to respect the naming scheme that we've set up. So for in this, it's not really an example, it's really the naming scheme you have to follow. It's the org name / the stack name you chose. If you don't follow this naming scheme, what it's going to do is it's going to create the stack under your personal account by default. I'll share the Nesto stacks in the team. We want to specify the Nesto org name. Another thing to know is if you simply run Pulumi stack in the CLI, it's going to be helpful to see all the resources that are currently provisioned into the stack. So it's going to draw all the entire tree of the stack is going to be printed into your console, and usually a very big tree. So going further, I want to show you what configs and secrets look like in Pulumi. So here, for example, on the left screenshot, I have opened pulumi.main.yaml for the global project. And you see it's simply a list of keys that I've given. However, most of them are encrypted. So in the top pane of that screenshot, I show you the differences. If you do a Pulumi set keyname plain text value, on the lower pane, you see it appears as keyname plain text value, plain and simple. But if you do config set keyname #2, plain text value #2, and you specify secret, then it's going to encrypt it in Pulumi main. And this is what makes it possible to push these secrets into the Git repos without fearing them to get unencrypted. Only developers who have Pulumi access can decrypt these secrets, and so that's keeping them secure. The screenshot on the right, I show you how to retrieve these secrets in the code. So you simply, for example, you do a key name config that require the key name that you need, and it's going to set it. I just show you this because I find it interesting that, for example, for key name number 2, well, this one is a secret in our case. And if you want Pulumi to know that you want this to be marked as a secret everywhere, it needs to store this value in the code base or in its stack. Well, instead of simply doing require, which would work, you would do require secret, and now you inform Pulumi that, okay, you need to be careful about what you do with this value. So keep that in mind as you read. So what I have shown here in this slide is our current Pulumi projects. So these are all from the Nesto infra repo under the Pulumi folder. And I've put in red the ones that we most often work in. So you have CI/CD, which are the configs for Cloud Build and CodeFresh. Cloud Build is the system that we've had for the longest time. CodeFresh is a little bit newer for our team, and this is where we try to push our newest and best practices. We have Env, which are the different environments that run on host. And host is the base infrastructure on which we run the environments. I'll get into more details about that later on. For the other ones, we have common. These are the shared code across Pulumi. We have Elasticsearch. These are the multitude of GCP projects Pulumi, but not through the end and host projects. So I have made a screenshot of the list of projects we have on the bottom right. And SFTP, this is a little project that I created when I joined Nesto. It's the files.com managed SFTP service. So you probably, it's really niche project. Maybe it's going to be moved to common or to global later on. So I told you I would tell us, I promised I would tell you about what is host versus env. So it's important to know this concept. For us, host means that is the base infrastructure. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. We could have directly named it base infrastructure to be less confusing, but this is the name we chose. And it really relates to resources that are slow to provision or are reused in different ends. So think of just actual GCP projects, just complete projects, or Cloud SQL instances, or Kubernetes clusters. Sometimes these take 15 minutes to provision, and obviously we don't want to have to delete them and recreate them every time. So we create a host, and then we build on top of it with envs. And this is what envs are used for. So service level infra, you can have many envs per host. So sometimes you want to create or delete a quick env. For example, in the case of ephemeral developer environment. So this is why we want envs to be quick to create and to delete. And it can be any resource like databases, pub subtopics. You see the idea. So in this slide, I want to tell you about unique resource numbers. This is how Pulumi identifies your resource across the entire list of resources that Pulumi looks at and provisions or takes care of. So this is the naming scheme, or rather the construction of a URN. So you have your stack name, then your project name, parent type, resource type, and resource name. So it's a long string, and when you do Pulumi stack, you can add the little flag show URNs. So for example, if you want to address a specific resource of your infrastructure, you could give the URN, and Pulumi will know without any ambiguity what resource you're talking about. Sometimes you have a duplicate resource across stacks. Well, the URN is there to help Pulumi know exactly what you're talking about. Just be careful. If you change the name of a resource, it can throw off Pulumi a little bit because it's going to change its unique resource number. And then if you change it, for example, if you have an existing URN and then you change it, Pulumi, when it's going to plan the change, is going to notice that, I have a previous URN that is not there anymore, and I have a new URN. What is it going to try to do? It will delete the resource to recreate it. And sometimes this is not what you want at all. So just be aware of this. If you want to rename it without deleting, there are ways to do it. I won't go into that much detail, but just be aware of that. So, really cool part of Pulumi that we love is Pulumi providers. These are plug and play for all your AWS, Google Cloud, Kubernetes. There are a ton of providers that are out of the box supported officially by Pulumi. And that's very fun. That means less job for us. If I want to create a bucket, I don't have to read through the Google API and reinvent the wheel. I simply import that provider into Pulumi, and as you see on the screenshot on the right, just one liner, I can create my bucket. I don't have to worry about anything. However, sometimes the provider you want is not supported. I told you earlier in the slides about files.com, which was an SFTP provider we used. Well, it's not supported at all. So what we had to use for that case is dynamic providers. And a screenshot on the left here is how we implemented a provider that could allow us to create and delete folders on files.com. So we split it into two parts. The first part at the bottom is really the resource provider for which we specify CRUD operations. So CRUD is create, read, update, delete. Pulumi only requires you to have a create command in your resource provider. But of course, it's the more you add, the better it is, because if you only allow it to create, well, then you can only create, right? So when you have your CRUD specified, then you can implement that resource directly in a one-liner, as I've done on the top of the screenshot. And this is really powerful because if you have any service that provides an API, well, you can implement your dynamic provider and you're good to go. So always check first if your provider is supported, and if not, well, know that you have this flexibility to create any provider that you need. Next up, I want to talk about models. This is a pattern that we use to create a separation of concerns between DevOps and Dev, because the Pulumi code files that we have um, are not only strictly reserved for DevOps. Some are modified by devs, and devs don't have the same concerns as the DevOps team. So what we try to do is we use models to expose only to devs what they have to care about, and whenever possible, we set defaults. So for example, on the screenshot that I have here on the left, it's a list of services that we have running in an environment. So services like authentication, communications, accounts, and so on. You see that for some services like authentication, we specify, okay, I don't want a database. For other ones like communications, we just tell Pulumi, I want this service, give me all the defaults. And this is really appreciated by developers because they don't have to think too hard. They really have to specify only what they care about. And for us, it's a lot easier because we can tell them, okay, you take care of this file, this is your responsibility, and we can focus on the bits that interest us. So this is really powerful. So that's part one. Now let's go into part two, the workflow of Pulumi PRs. Why do I want to talk about our workflow for PRs? It's because all steps are currently manual. Unfortunately, we don't have a pipeline for Pulumi because we haven't resolved every detail that we need. For example, if we if we do a change in QA, well, how do we tell the pipeline not necessarily to run it on production, or maybe? So this is on the roadmap, not currently implemented. So I'll show you the steps that we follow right now to safely merge some changes into Pulumi. So the first step, obviously the most obvious step, you write your code change. So let's say you add the new service to the list of services. So call it my new service. Very easy, and even easier, you just choose the default values for everything. Next, you do a little Pulumi preview on your local branch, just to make sure that the code can be ran without errors, and also to validate that the resources you're about to create or to affect are actually the resources you want to affect. So here you see the list. I'm creating a new service. I'm creating new topic bindings. This all looks good. And fun fact, remember that in the screenshot, you have a view live and you have a new URL. So you can retrieve this example that I ran. If you click on the link in these slides, you will access to the Pulumi consoles and you will see exactly what I've ran this test. So this can be useful to share with other developers if you have questions or if you need help or anything. So let's say you ran your Pulumi preview successfully. Good job. You're ready to create a PR and get it approved. But as you might suspect, we don't merge yet. Since we don't have a pipeline, we're not merging yet. So just let's say you got your approval, your teammate looked at it and said, all right, I approve. The next step is for someone to take your code, someone that has Pulumi access, and they will merge your branch to their local master branch. And this is a little bit weird. Um, when they have the code on their master branch, they will do the Pulumi up. They will make sure they're on the right stack. And also important, when you perform a Pulumi up update, you see on the bottom of the left screenshot, you can say yes or no to perform the update, but most importantly, you can choose details. And this will give you more details than the Pulumi preview would have shown you previously. So you can really dig into exactly what specifications Pulumi is going to give to all your resources. So final step, when you did run the Pulumi up successfully, then you can push your local master branch to the infra repo, and that's going to mark the PR as merged automatically. The reason we do this is because we want to make sure that whatever is on the master branch is exactly what was on the branch for which we ran Pulumi up. That's very important. And this is the best way we found to do it so far. So part 3 already. I want to give you random nuggets of wisdom, things that I did not find obvious at first when I learned Pulumi, and I hope will be helpful to you. The first part is output and input. So Pulumi has a really cool concept of output and input. And for example, when you create a resource, sometimes you're going to need its ID, and it's not known at the moment you write your code. You cannot access it yet. So output values in Pulumi are values that are unknown at the time of writing code, and it's similar to promises in JavaScript. So let's take the example of the resource ID again. Let's say in the screenshot below, I'm creating a user pool in AWS. Cool. So I have my pool constant object, and in the next call on the next line, I need the ID of my pool to use it to set a user pool client. Well, Pulumi handles all the logic under the hood of saying the ID is an output, and I feed it as an input to the as an input argument to the user pool client. So Pulumi does that all under the hood, but it's important to understand this logic. And I'll show you why on the next slide, because sometimes you can fall into traps that will not work. And this is because Pulumi runs in 2 stages. The first stage is it executes your code as written, so it creates the representation of all your resources. It makes the graphs, verifies the resource dependencies to ensure you don't have circular dependencies and things like that. So see the example on the left here. I'm trying to concatenate an output, which is the client ID, with a string. And this won't work because in the first pass of the Pulumi up, the client ID is undefined and it won't know what to do. This value is needed. So what you would need to do to resolve this is to give a function to run using the .apply. So I would say, okay, when my client ID is known, here's what you do with it. You concatenate it with CloudSpeak user pool client. You give it basically a value upCID. You store it in a variable upCID, and this is what you do with it when the value is known. And so Pulumi is going to resolve this. This is really useful because if you use the input and output types right, this is going to tell Pulumi in which order it should create your resources. So this is really a crucial concept. Next up, if you're a terminal user like me, you really have to start using Visual Studio Code because you will not survive if you don't use the control click or if you can hover over all the resources to get definitions about what is what. So just a quick tip for terminal users out there, bite the bullet, install VS Code, at least to understand the code on your first pass. You will not regret it. Next up is the Pulumi state. Sometimes you will, in your Pulumi life, you will do a code change and you will come across this error. For example, preview failed, unable to delete resource, and it's going to ask you to explicitly state Pulumi state unprotect with a URN. The reason why this is the case is sometimes for sensitive resources, we protect them. For example, if for our entire Datadog deployment, we protect it because we don't want to lose configurations or we don't want to create downtime or things like that. So some resources are protected and it's going to put a lock on the resource. So next time you want to delete it, Pulumi is going to ask you to, okay, you really have to tell me to unprotect this, otherwise there's no moving forward. So uh, sometimes it happened to me in the past where we put a protect on something that was not supposed to happen, and it was a little bit tedious to unprotect everything. So far, I think in the info repo currently, the protect statements make sense and are sensible. So it's very rare that I have to unprotect something, but just be aware of it. If you have to unprotect something, it's usually because in the code, we protected it explicitly. Um, Finally, I think, I'm not sure if this is the last nugget, but an important one, Pulumi stack export. What this is going to do is going to export all of your stack as a JSON file. So remember earlier in the slides I showed you Pulumi stack, it prints you a tree. Well, this tree is useful for human readability, but it cannot be read back into Pulumi. So if you want to create a backup of the actual state of your stack, this is how you do it. You stack export into a stack.json file, for example, and this is what it looks like. It's just a straight up JSON. And helpfully, Pulumi allows you to re-import it using the Pulumi stack import. However, you have to know that this is a very power user manipulation and not something you want to do every day. A case where this can go wrong, imagine you do a Pulumi stack export. Okay, so you've backed up your file, and then you do a change manually on the console. And then, for example, the console like GCP, I don't know, you change a resource. And then you do a Pulumi stack import to re-import your stack. Then Pulumi is not aware of what you did by hand, and things can go out of whack really quickly. So be careful with it. This is a power user manipulation, but at least you can know it exists. Sometimes you have to use it. Oh, I had one more nugget of knowledge for you. I want to tell you the difference between destroy and rm. These are two commands you can do in Pulumi, and sometimes it's hard to remember which one does what. So destroy relates to deprovisioning resources in the cloud. You tell Pulumi, I want you to delete everything that is provisioned in this stack right now. You do this with Pulumi destroy. What's interesting is that after deprovisioning these resources, the stack still exists and is still ready to accept more commands or reprovisioning these resources. If you do Pulumi RM, it's kind of the opposite. You destroy the Pulumi stack, so you remove the link between Pulumi and the resources that it administrated, and the resources in the cloud still exist. So there's a use case for both, of course. And if you fully want to destroy resources and all the, the, the metadata and the, the historical data you had stored in Pulumi for a specific stack, you would need to run both. So these two commands are independent. Okay, so we're just about reaching the end here. So these are the resources that I have for you. We have a Pulumi Confluence page at Nesto that we're working on that is constantly expanding, and it should be helpful if you need more information. We have all of our Pulumi code is currently in infra/Pulumi in the Nesto SIA organization. And if you ever have a question that you need answering that you can't find in the docs, well, there's always the Pulumi Slack workspace that is public to everyone in the world, and hopefully someone will be able to help you out. So that's all for me. I was wondering if you had any question I could help you with that might not have been answered in this talk.
Oh, I'm good. That was a good overview of everything.
Good. So I hope to anyone watching at home that was useful. Let me know if you have feedback on this talk. I'll keep working on it and maybe give another 101. That's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching.